Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I am joined today by Mr. Caleb Daniels, the author of the upcoming really cool new book, Licensed Troubleshooter, The Guns of James Bond, which is currently on Kickstarter with how many awesome stretch goals?
Too many to count, but I think that's what we're here for, right?
A ton of cool stretch goals. And there's just so much interesting depth of lore to the Guns of James Bond. And specifically today, we're talking about the film Dr. No. This is the first James Bond movie, but the sixth book.
Yes, sixth novel.
First one they put on film, and the guns, which I think we can safely say every firearm in Dr. No is wrong.
Yes, and
Right?
that's what we get to cover here today is the
Right.
not only are there stand-ins, but there's stand-ins to the stand-ins, like Russian nesting dolls of firearms.
Of firearms errors.
Yes, it's terribly fun.
So a lot of people, I think, first off, when you think Guns of James Bond, you think, the PPK. And
Which we literally don't even have one on the table
we
right
don't,
now. Because one doesn't appear in Dr. No.
there's not a single PPK in the entire film. Now they talk about them.
Yes.
Walter PPK. The American CIA swear by them.
They're theoretically there. That's
Yes.
what's being described. And then the other gun that people know from Dr. No is the Beretta.
Absolutely. Which is
Because-
also talked about and is also incorrectly described.
Right. Now we do have a Beretta 418 here that we'll talk about today, but it also never shows up in the movie.
That's correct.
So let's start with the very first scene, very first gun scene.
Yes.
Which is the one that people iconically remember. It is 007 gets called in, he's given his mission, and M says, by the way, give me that stupid Beretta.
Yes.
It nearly got you killed, which we'll talk about a little later on,
Yeah, I'm
where
sure.
that comes from. But takes his Beretta and gives him a PP.
7.65 mil with a delivery like a brick through a plate glass window.
Okay. Well, what actually happens there?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, probably one of the most iconic scenes in the franchise. It's probably one of the most quoted. You mentioned the Walther PPK. Someone immediately says, "Oh, Walther PPK, 7.65 millimeter with a delivery through a plate glass window," because that's just what that was the introduction to James Bond. I mean, it's 3 a.m. He's coming back from a casino. The lines in that whole scene are so fun, right? He's walking in and he's in black tie. M's behind his desk and he's like, "Oh, difficult finding me 007 or something to that effect?" He's like, "Hopefully I didn't catch you sleeping." He's like, "Never on the firm's time, sir." Because he's been gambling at 3 a.m. on a weeknight. And that's just what happens, because it's James Bond. And so he takes off his dinner jacket, and he's, "Take off your jacket," is what's said, and he whips out a Beretta. But not the 25 that's described. He pulls out this guy.
A Beretta 34. Or
Beretta 34,
35.
Or 35. We can't tell, because it's, that's just caliber variation. So, we describe it as the 34/5 because that's the most accurate you can get to something like that.
Yeah.
But this is what you see. So
It's what Connery is handing over in the scene. And at the same time, M, Q,
yes, Boothroyd, whatever you want to say.
gives him the new Walther, the Walther PPK, but hands him, one of these guys, a Walther PP.
Yes.
Now, my understanding,
Well, on the other side of that too, before we get too far, not only
Yeah.
was it a Walther PP, it was a Walther PP chambered for 380 auto.
now, how do we know that?
Because the prop guns have gone up on auction. So one of the two that were reportedly on set did go to auction, and it was authenticated by the Bapty Prop House, who supplied the Bond guns throughout the vast majority of the early films, and up until recently, I believe. And so, yeah, they confirmed that it was a 380 auto pistol that was on the set that day. Not only was it full size, it was the wrong caliber.
Nesting layers of rock.
Exactly. Again, you get the extreme nuance there, and so it's interesting because you get one wrong gun replaced with another wrong gun.
So I think the best running theory as to why is a
Oh,
combination of, well, it was readily available, and Sean Connery's not a small guy.
Yeah, I mean,
He's tall, he was muscular. Like Ian Fleming, on first learning that they cast Sean Connery as James Bond, his reaction was pretty negative, right?
he's like, he looks like a brute, something to that effect like that, where he's like, he's just so massive, it doesn't make sense. And so, if you want to be charitable with the props department, perhaps they could source one of these in theory, but that would have disappeared in his hand.
Right, you'd hardly even see it. And on filmmaking, the visual is everything, really. So
Yeah. So a more charitable read is that it could have been something to that effect, right? And that's pure speculation and conjecture, but it's a nice story to tell, and it's something that could be said. On the other hand, these were movies that, you have to remember, home video really wasn't a thing.
right.
if you wanted to rewatch the movie, it needed to be re-released to theaters or on network television on one of 3 channels, which, based on the movie's contents, wasn't going to happen.
Yep.
So it was also the first one. Like, they had the options for all the movies, but it was good enough, right? They got a Beretta, check. They got a Walther, fantastic. And that was good enough to make it work. And that's kind of, it's funny because that's not even where the errors end.
Oh, that's only the beginning.
We're talking like the first 5 minutes of the film.
So it seems like the other issue they had on set with this film was their Walther, or Walthers, wouldn't run reliably on blanks.
Yeah, that's purportedly what happened, and there's a lot of evidence to that because every time you see the PP close up when it's supposed to be firing, it actually ends up being one of 3 completely different guns.
It's never a PP that's firing, much less a PPK.
Right.
So the first place where we see Bond actually shoot is in the girl's room.
Yes,
Right.
the first major scene that we see the up close gun firing, not just like drawn down or anything.
So assassin comes into the room. Bond's sitting in a chair playing solitaire, but he's made the bed up with like blankets under the blanket to look like he's sleeping in it. Assassin comes in and pop, 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 ventilates the bed.
Yes.
And then Bond shoots him.
Bond casually smoking in the corner, makes him throw his gun away. You see him holding a gun that's supposed to vaguely look like a PP with a silencer. What's fascinating is there's all these type shots, and even on the VHS, you can make out the FN on the grips.
This is by far the scene that's the most obvious gun mistake because he's putting the suppressor on.
Yeah, so the suppressor goes, he rips it off. You see it go on and off, and it's like a half thread. It's on a dowel rod, so you see like it jammed into the barrel and then ripped out of the barrel, which is hilarious. But yeah, he's like leaning into the corner, holding it like this, and not only is this gun wrong, there's one of the coldest lines in the entire Bond franchise. He's got a cigarette dangling out of the corner of his mouth. He's got an unarmed combatant on the ground holding a gun to him, and he's watching Professor Dent slowly move the bed sheet that's on the ground over to him where his gun's been
He's
tossed
trying to
aside.
recover his gun.
And he jumps up, grabs it, which in true 60s movie fashion, he's holding it by not only the firearm, but he's got his hand on the suppressor and he's going to shoot it like this, like a Sten gun almost. And it goes click, click, and Bond goes...
It's a Smith & Wesson. And you've had your 6.
And then he
What is
bag
it,
dumps
really?
into the guy.
It's this.
A silenced Colt
It's a 1911. It's not a Smith & Wesson. Nope. It's not a 6-shot gun. Obviously, this line of dialogue is based around a revolver.
Yeah,
Where
absolutely.
it would make some sense. Like, I counted you fire 6 rounds into the bed when you first walked in. I know you're trying to sneakily get that gun off the floor, and I don't care because I know it's empty. But it's a 1911.
It's a 1911.
And on the floor, it's not locked open.
No.
Like, by what you see in the film, it should be loaded and hot. And so, yeah, the line of dialogue is completely wrong. And, of course, Bond is shooting with a PPK that is not a PPK.
Yeah,
it's an FN 1910.
It's a PPK that's actually a PP that's masquerading now as an FN 1910.
So, again, second major shooting scene in the film. And literally every gun is wrong.
Yep.
And then we can move on to the third.
Yeah, the
gun
third
scene,
major
gunfire
gun scene. Yeah.
We're leaving out, like, at the very beginning, you've got the 3 blind mice who...
Yeah, which incidentally use the exact same suppressed Colt 1911 that you see later in the film by Professor Dent. Again, small budget, small
it's their
film.
own set.
Yeah, they made it work.
And
it's
and
cool.
That was filmed in Jamaica, wasn't it?
Yes.
So it's not like they can just pop down to the prop house and get a different gun.
Right. And working with what you have.
Third, final major gunfire scene. Bond and the girl and his assistant are on the beach.
Yep, in Crab Key. They're on
Crab-
Dr. No's Island, yes.
And Dr. No's Dragon is out, which is just in retrospect, looking at a 60s film, it's hilarious. It's clearly like a Jeep with some plywood bolted to the side.
Masquerading as a tank, masquerading as a dragon. Again,
Right.
layers upon layers. It's like the Shrek onion.
Yeah, exactly. And Bond goes to shoot out its headlights.
I'll take the headlights and the tires.
And first off, his gun form is terrible. It's one of these stupid.
Yeah, and he's shooting through the bushes like this.
Yes. And so he draws his PPK that's actually a PP. And there's a series of quick cuts where he'll shoot and they show the dragon and he shoots and they show the dragon. And every time it comes back to the gun changes.
Yeah, because so again, this is what ties into that theory that the Walther PP that they had wasn't cycling blanks, so they couldn't locate blanks for that caliber, whatever the case may be, right? Some of that's lost to history for sure. But makes sense because the gun does cycle on camera, but every time it cycles, it flashes first to a Colt 1911, or presumably a Colt, but a 1911
Yeah, it's
nonetheless. And then it follows to a Browning High Power.
Yep.
You see both of them, clear muzzle profiles, cycling, locking back, the whole shebang. And then at the conclusion of the scene, it cycles back to the Walther PP. So it's funny. It's one of those things that you probably wouldn't have noticed on the VHS cut, or probably not even in theaters at the time. But when you see it on Blu-ray, it's astoundingly clear that the muzzle profile of the firearm dramatically changes time and time and time again, and then it concludes back to the PP. So it's funny. I mean, we have what should be 2 guns in this entire film, and we have a plethora on the table in front of us.
Now, the American CIA agents are also carrying
Yes,
PPKs.
which are PPs.
Felix Leiter, and he draws down on Bond at one point.
Yep.
And sure enough, he's also got a Walther PP.
Yeah, and that's where the confirmation from Bapty that there was 2 PPs on set, one for Bond and one for Leiter.
Yeah.
So that's
I think it's kind of impressive to have a film like this that literally gets every single firearm detail wrong.
it's terribly fun.
Like, by mistake, they should have gotten something correct.
And that's what I love about it, honestly, is it's something that, for me, selfishly, as a guy who wrote a book on the guns of James Bond, it gave me a lot more to work with. If I just had the PPK, this would have been a very short video. So it's really fun and neat to kind of go through all these guns and what appears on the film, by accident or not. And I should note, this is not the only time accidents like this happen, because, like you mentioned, on set has severe limitations.
Yep.
Sometimes when they fly to different countries, because the Bond movies are globetrotting, you had other guns that mysteriously made their way to, be a PPK stand-in. One of the most famous is the Beretta Model 70 or 71. In The Spy Who Loved Me, Roger Moore is in Egypt, and they happen to only have one of those. He took some production stills of him holding the gun with the skyline behind him. That ended up being on the cover of many VHS tapes, and it was very clearly a Beretta. And that presser image is very famous as well. So it's something that happened in 1903 in when they go to Japan, and You Only Live Twice is another stand-in for a Walther PPK. All that to say, so much more cool history gets to fold in because of that, and it makes me have a lot more fun because it provides a lot more nuance.
And unless you're a totally obsessive gun nerd, these mistakes don't actually impact the film.
No, not at all.
Like, the character, probably, some of you guys probably knew some of these issues, but I bet very few of you knew all of these issues going in. And the ones you knew about, they don't hurt the movie's feel. It's still,
Right.
It's one of my favorite Bond movies.
Yeah,
honestly.
I mean, it was the early Connery era could do no wrong. Dr. No through Thunderball was just a phenomenal run. It was the golden era of James Bond. I mean, they really somewhat kept to the novels. They made changes, honestly, that made more sense. I think my favorite change made going all the way back to the beginning of the film is with the Beretta. Ian Fleming, in the novel Dr. No, or in the conclusion of the novel, the 5th book, From Russia with Love, has James Bond's Beretta with a suppressor on it inside the waistband. And he goes to draw it while he's getting attacked by the poisoned blade on the shoe by Rosa Klebb, and his gun gets jammed and snagged inside his waistband because of the silencer. And it's that reason that Ian Fleming provides as to why the Beretta gets retired.
And in the books, that happens before Dr. No.
Right.
In the movies, the movies are in the opposite order.
The movie's invert. But the thing that I like is in the film Dr. No, the reason why the Beretta gets retired is because of James.
Yeah, maybe not, but it jammed on your last job and you spent 6 months in hospital in consequence.
Yeah. So it's actually a fault of the firearm, not a fault of an accessory that he clearly uses on every other version of his gun as well. I mean, later in that same movie, he uses a silencer with the pistol, which to me has always been a question of, well, if they wanted to include a silenced pistol, maybe that's why they changed that line. Because it didn't really make sense for him to have a silenced gun replacing another silenced gun that almost killed him.
Yeah.
That just doesn't visually make sense to folks. And Fleming, in fairness to him, in the book Dr. No, doesn't mention silencers. So, all that to say, I think the early films made changes that actually made sense. I love that the Beretta is what it jams, and that's why it goes to the Walther. And it's cool.
So if you guys enjoyed this, you would absolutely enjoy Caleb's book, Licensed Troubleshooter, The Guns of James Bond, which we have right now running on Kickstarter. Lots of extras, lots of cool stretch goals. And I'm very excited to have this book, to be able to present this book to you guys. Caleb's done an awesome job on it. And The Guns of Dr. No is only the beginning. So I have a link to the Kickstarter description down, or the Kickstarter campaign down in the description. Definitely check it out. And thanks for coming on, Caleb.
Yeah.
This was a fun overview to do.
Oh, absolutely.
It really came as a surprise to me when I first realized through Caleb. Like, I knew about the PP to 1911, the high power back to PP, but the other issues in it, I hadn't actually caught. Like, I go back and look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, that is the thing. But anyway, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fun.
Thanks for watching.
Cheers.